Drinking a glass of water with your food waters down your stomach acid. It weakens the acid. It slows the whole business of breaking your dinner into pieces small enough to live on. That is the story. And for a good many years I would have told it to you with a perfectly straight face, and I would not have felt one flicker of guilt. Because on paper it is beautiful. It is clean arithmetic, and clean arithmetic is a dangerous thing, because it makes you feel like you already understand. So let me tell it to you the way it deserves to be told, at full strength, before I lay a finger on it. Your stomach, when you have not eaten for a while, sits at a pH of about 1.5 to 2. Call it 2, to be kind. Now that number, 2, looks small and tame, like a low-speed limit. But the pH scale is a sneaky one. It does not count in ordinary steps. It counts in factors of 10. Every single whole number you go down is not a little more acid. It is 10 times more acid. So from pH 2 down to pH 1 is not a nudge. It is 10 times the punch. And the hydrogen ion concentration in your gastric juice, the thing that actually does the biting, is somewhere around 0.1 to 0.16 moles per liter. That is a real, honest, strong acid. That is not a metaphor. That is the kind of number a chemist respects. Now hold that in your head and walk it out to its conclusion. Your blood, the stuff running through your arm right now, sits at a pH of about 7.4. Your stomach sits near 1. 7.4 minus 1 is a little over 6. 6 steps on a scale where each step is a factor of 10. 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. That is 1,000,000. More than 1,000,000. So the acid in your stomach is not 7 times stronger than your blood in hydrogen ions. It is more than 1,000,000 times the concentration. Sit with that for a second. If your blood were a single drop, your stomach acid at full strength would be a swimming pool of the stuff, in terms of how crowded it is with those hungry hydrogen ions. It is strong enough to take the shine off metal. It is strong enough to dissolve bone if you gave it time. So here you are at the dinner table, and Aunt somebody, or the fellow across from you who read it somewhere, leans in and says, "Do not drink that water with your meal. You will dilute your acid. You will ruin your digestion." And you look down at your glass. 200 milliliters of plain water. Neutral. pH 7, near enough. And you think, well, of course. Of course, if I pour neutral water into strong acid, the acid gets weaker. That is what dilution is. You learned it stirring lemonade. More water, less sour. You do not need a laboratory to know that pouring water into something makes that something more watery. It is almost insulting how obvious it is. And here is the part that seems to slam the lid shut on the whole question. This is not just barroom reasoning. Somebody actually did the experiment. In 2008, there was a careful little study, 12 healthy volunteers, 6 of them men, average age around 26. All of them checked to make sure they did not have that stomach bug that muddies these things. And the scientists put a pH probe right down into the stomach so they could watch the acidity live minute by minute, no guessing. Then they had each person drink 1 glass of water, about 200 milliliters. That is it, just water. And what happened? The pH shot up above 4 in 10 of the 12 people. Above 4. Remember, they started near 1 or 2. And it did not take an hour. It did not take 10 minutes. The median time was about 1 minute. 1 minute after the water went down, in most of these folks, the acid had gone from a snarling 1 point something up past 4. That is a huge move on a logarithmic scale. From pH 1 to pH 4 is a 1,000-fold drop in hydrogen ion crowding. 1,000-fold. In 60 seconds. From a single glass of water. Well, there it is. The acid folded up exactly the way the beaker model swears it must. You poured neutral water into strong acid, and the acid got weak, fast, and dramatically, and a machine with a probe down someone's throat measured it happening. If you wanted a courtroom exhibit for the case that water ruins your stomach acid, you could hardly ask for a cleaner one. The prosecution rests. Case closed. Go home. Stop drinking water with your steak. Except it is not closed, and I am going to tell you exactly why, and it is going to bother you. Because it bothered me. Because the same probe that caught the pH flying up above 4 kept right on watching. It did not stop at 1 minute and pack up its instruments. It watched what came next. And what came next is the thing nobody puts on the dinner table warning. That spike, that dramatic thousand-fold collapse of your stomach acid, that emergency, that catastrophe your aunt warned you about, lasted about 3 minutes. 3 minutes. And then the acidity came climbing right back down where it started, all on its own, with nobody adding anything, with no second glass, with no pill, with no help of any kind. Now 3 minutes might not mean much to you yet, so let me give you something to measure it against from that very same study, because they were clever enough to test the comparison. They also gave people a liquid antacid. You know the stuff, the chalky white liquid you take when your chest is on fire. That is a thing specifically engineered, designed by chemists whose entire job was to neutralize stomach acid and keep it neutralized. And how long did that engineered acid killer hold the pH up above 4? About 12 minutes. 4 times longer than the water. And then they tested the serious drugs, the proton pump inhibitors, the omeprazoles and the raboprazoles, the medicines a doctor gives you when your stomach acid is genuinely a medical problem. Those held the pH up above 4 for the entire 6 hours they bothered to watch. It took those drugs a median of about 171, 175 minutes even to get you there, but once you were up, you stayed up for hours. So line them up. The real drug, hours. The drugstore antacid, 12 minutes. The glass of water your aunt is frightened of, 3 minutes, and it climbs back down by itself. And that, right there, is where the beautiful arithmetic starts coming apart in your hands. Because stop and ask the obvious question, the one the beaker model cannot answer. If your stomach were really just a beaker, just a bowl of acid sitting there, then when you pour water in and dilute it, it stays diluted. That is what dilution is. That is the whole point of dilution. A glass of watered-down lemonade does not, after 3 minutes, quietly become strong lemonade again while you are not looking. It cannot. There is no lemon fairy sneaking back in. Once you have added the water is in there. The only way to make it strong again is to add more lemon, or boil off water, or do some actual work. Dilution does not undo itself. Ever. It is a one-way street. That is basic. That is bedrock. So how in the world does a beaker of acid, diluted 1,000-fold in 1 minute, heal itself back to full strength in 3? A beaker cannot do that. A bowl cannot do that. A glass of lemonade absolutely cannot do that. If your stomach were the passive tank of acid the story imagines, that pH would go up when you drank the water, and it would just sit there, weakened, watery, exactly as watered down as you left it, until the water slowly drained away on its own sweet time. It would not come sprinting back down to pH 2 in 180 seconds. That is not the behavior of a beaker. That is not dilution. That is something else entirely. Something is fighting back, and once you see that, once you really see it, you cannot unsee it, and the whole tidy dinner table lecture quietly falls to the floor. Because the numbers that were supposed to prove the myth just did the opposite. The water did dilute the acid, sure, for a moment, but the speed with which the acid came back is the fingerprint of something the beaker model has no room for at all. The stomach did not sit there and take it. The stomach noticed. The stomach answered. In about the time it takes to butter a piece of bread, your stomach detected that its acid had gone weak, and it did something about it, and it won. So the real question is not whether water dilutes your stomach acid. It plainly does for about a minute or two. The real question, the one worth the next 20 minutes of your life, is this. What kind of a thing is your stomach, that you can hit it with 1,000-fold blow to its chemistry, and it shrugs the whole thing off before you have swallowed your next bite? Because whatever that thing is, it is not a beaker. And the moment you understand what it actually is, you are never going to think about the meat in your belly the same way again. Let me tell you what a beaker is, because I want to be fair to the idea before I take it apart. A beaker is a dumb bucket. You pour acid in, it is acidic. You pour water in, it gets weaker, and it stays weaker until you come back and do something about it. A beaker has no opinion. It has no memory. It does not care what its own contents are doing. If a beaker could dilute back to full strength in 3 minutes all by itself, you would not call it chemistry. You would call it a miracle, and you would sell tickets. So when your stomach does exactly that, quietly, 3 times a day, without you noticing, the honest thing to say is that your stomach is not a bucket. It is a machine that is watching its own insides. And here is how it watches. Down at the bottom of your stomach, in a region called the antrum, there are little sensors, and all they do all day long is taste the acid. They are not tasting your lunch. They are tasting the sourness itself, the hydrogen ions, the pH. When that number is low, when the acid is good and strong, the sensors are calm and they say nothing. But the instant a glass of water sweeps through and the sourness drops, when the pH climbs up past 3, past 4, those sensors light up like a smoke alarm. And they do not shout into empty air. They release a messenger, a hormone with a name worth knowing: gastrin. Gastrin is a chemical telegram. It goes out into the blood and it carries one order: make more acid. Now, who reads the telegram? Cells in the wall of your stomach called parietal cells. These are the little acid factories, and inside each one is a piece of machinery so good it is almost rude. It is a pump. Physiologists call it the hydrogen-potassium ATPase, which is a mouthful, so think of it simply as a tiny baler. A bucket brigade that grabs hydrogen ions one at a time and heaves them out into your stomach against a gradient that would make a mountaineer weep. It is throwing acid uphill. It is taking hydrogen from a place where there is very little of it and cramming it into a place where there is already a fortune of it, 1,000,000 times more, and it just keeps bailing. That is what the gastrin telegram switches on. Not a trickle, a flood. And how big is the flood? This is the number that ends the argument. When those parietal cells get the word, they do not politely increase output by a few percent. They open the tap 15, 20 times over the resting rate. Over the next few hours of a meal, your stomach can pour out something like 1,500 to 2,000 milliliters of fresh acidic juice. Now hold that against the thing we were all so worried about. You drank a glass of water, 200, maybe 250 milliliters. You brought a teacup to a flood. The stomach can secrete many times your little glass in new acid on demand whenever its own sensors tell it the acid has gone soft. You are not diluting a fixed tank. You are tapping on the shoulder of a factory that can outproduce your interference 10 times before you have finished chewing. So picture the whole loop now, running by itself, no thinking required. Water goes in. Sourness drops. Antrum sensors notice. Gastrin fires. Parietal pumps roar. Acid pours back. Sourness returns. And here is the elegant part, the part that makes it a real control system and not just a panic button. When the acid gets strong again, when the pH sinks back down toward 1, the same sensors that raised the alarm now go quiet, and the gastrin backs off and the pumps ease up. The system does not overshoot into infinity. It has a set point, like the thermostat on your wall. Acid secretion is actually held back near a pH of 1, and it is encouraged when the pH drifts up to 2.5 and above. Low means stop. High means go. That is a feedback loop, the same idea that steers a ship and steadies your hand and keeps a hawk level in a gusting wind. Your stomach is running 1, in acid, right now. Now, if you are still a little bit loyal to the dilution worry, and it is a stubborn worry, I have kept it alive on purpose, let me hand you the thing that should have bothered you from the start. You are frightened of a glass of water. Fine. But what do you think the food is doing? Think about it honestly. Water is nearly neutral, a pH of about 7, and it comes in a modest little glass. Your dinner is a mountain by comparison. A steak, a pile of potatoes, a slab of bread, all of it soaking up acid like a sponge, all of it far more of a chemical insult to a beaker of acid than any amount of water you would care to drink. The fasted stomach sits down around a pH of 1.5 to 2. Let a real meal fall into it, and that number does not nudge. It heaves. It can climb up into the 3s, the 4s, all the way towards 6 or 7 in the thick of things. That is a swing not of a little, but of thousands of times in hydrogen concentration, and it lasts not 3 minutes but hours. So where is the panic? Where is the diet book warning you never to eat food with your meals? There is no such book, because the notion is absurd on its face, and yet it is the very same objection, only bigger. If the dilution story were true, food would be a catastrophe and water would be a rounding error. The world has it exactly backwards. And the stomach handles the mountain the same calm way it handles the teacup. There is a beautiful old measurement of this. From a study back in 1973, Fortran and Walsh, who fed people a steak meal and then actually tracked how well the stomach contents could soak up acid over time. What they found is that the acid secretion runs the food down. The buffering power of the meal, its ability to blot up acid, gets cut by more than half within the first 2 hours. The stomach is not sitting there swamped and diluted, waiting to recover. It is actively clawing the pH back down the whole time, pump against sponge, and the pump is winning. The food is the flood. The stomach is the levee. And the levee holds. I promised you something odd in the middle of all this, and here it is, one of those facts that sounds made up and is not. When your parietal cells are bailing hydrogen into your stomach, they cannot just conjure it from nothing. The chemistry inside the cell splits something, and for every hydrogen ion it shoves out into the acid, it has to get rid of a leftover, a bicarbonate ion, and it dumps that bicarbonate the other way, out the back door, into your blood. Bicarbonate is the stuff in baking soda. It is an alkali. So every time your stomach makes itself more sour, it makes your blood, for a little while, a touch more sweet, a touch more alkaline. Physiologists have a lovely name for it. The alkaline tide. Right after a big meal, the blood leaving your stomach is running slightly toward the basic side, and if you were fussy enough, you could even measure it turning up in what leaves the body afterward. Sit with that a moment. The act of digesting your dinner sends a faint alkaline wave rolling through your bloodstream. That is not something a beaker of acid does. A beaker just sits there. A tide is the mark of a pump, of active machinery, moving ions with a purpose, spending energy trading one thing for another across a wall. It is the signature, written in your own blood, that this is not dilution. It never was. All right, we have the sensors, the telegram, the pump, the thermostat, the tide. There is one loose end, and it is the most physical one of all. Where does the water actually go? Because we have talked as if it hangs around to be fought over, and it mostly does not. Liquid does not leave your stomach the slow trudging way a solid meal does. It leaves fast, and it leaves in a very particular mathematical shape. It drains out by what we call first-order kinetics, which is a fancy way of saying the fuller the stomach is with liquid, the faster it pushes it out, so the volume falls away in that smooth downhill curve and exponential decay. The same curve you see when a hot cup of coffee gives up its heat, or when a crowd files out of a stadium fastest at the start and dribbles at the end. Put a glass of water in, and the time for half of it to be gone is on the order of 13 minutes. 13 minutes to lose half, and half again, until by around 45 minutes the stomach volume is back where it started, as if you had drunk nothing at all. So the water you were warned about is not lingering in there like a spoiler at a party, watering down your digestion for hours. It is already leaving before it can do much of anything, sliding out on its own clock while the acid pumps go right on working underneath it. You worried about a guest who was halfway out the door before you noticed him arrive. So let us step back from the whole scene and look at what we have really been describing, because it is bigger than a glass of water. Somebody at the table told you the stomach was a beaker. A little cup of strong acid, sitting there, and if you pour clean water into a cup of strong acid, you get weaker acid. That is chemistry any child can do at a sink. And it is true. For a beaker, if I hand you a jar of stomach juice on the counter and you splash water into it, yes, you have watered it down, and it stays watered down, because a jar has no ambition. A jar does not want anything. It just sits there being whatever concentration you last made it. But the stomach is not a jar. That is the whole thing. That is the trick your dinner companion never noticed. The stomach is a factory floor with the machine still running and a foreman watching the gauges. When the pH drifted up toward 4, some sensor down in the lower part in the antrum read that number off the gauge and did not like it, and sent word up the line. The hormone goes out, the parietal cells hear about it, and those little pumps in their walls, the ones trading a hydrogen ion out for a potassium ion, over and over, thousands of times a second, they simply work harder. They throw the tap wide open, 15, 20 times the idle rate. And within a couple of minutes, the number on the gauge is back where the foreman wanted it. You did not dilute a chemical, you gave a nudge to a control system, and the control system did what control systems do. It corrected. I love this because it is the same idea you find everywhere once you learn to see it. Think of the man steering a boat across a river with a current pushing him sideways. An amateur points the nose straight at the far dock and ends up 100 yards downstream baffled. The riverman points the nose upstream into the push and travels in a straight line to the dock. He is not fighting the current in some grand battle. He is reading it and answering it, continuously with small corrections, so that the thing he cares about, his heading, never actually changes. Your stomach is the riverman, the water is the current, and the heading it cares about is that low, fierce, working acidity, and it holds that heading with corrections so quick and so cheap that you never feel them happen. And here is what I want you to really sit with, because it is the joke buried at the bottom of this whole worry. The thing that genuinely shoves the stomach's chemistry around is not the water. It is the meal. It is the food you are told to protect from the water. A real dinner, a piece of steak, a plate of potatoes, comes in and soaks up acid like a sponge, and the pH does not creep up to 4 for 3 minutes. It climbs, and it can sit up around 3, 4, 5, even higher, for a good long while, an hour, 2 hours, a swing enormously bigger and enormously longer than anything a swallow of water could dream of causing. The very meal you are eating is a far greater disturbance to the acid than the glass beside your plate. And the stomach handles it. Of course it handles it. That is its job. That is what it was built over I do not know how many hundreds of millions of years to do. Men measured this carefully back in the early 1970s, feeding people a steak dinner and watching the numbers. And they found that the acid secretion actively chases the food's buffering down, so that the stomach's power to soak up acid falls by more than half within about 2 hours. Not because the food gave up, because the pumps kept pouring. The system out-argued the meal. So if you are lying awake worrying that a few ounces of water will cripple a machine that eats an entire steak dinner for practice, twice a day, every day, your whole life, and wins every single time, you may rest. You are worrying about a raindrop landing on a river, and I have been saving the strangest part, because it is the kind of fact that makes you laugh out loud at how clever the plumbing is. When those parietal cells pump a hydrogen ion out into the stomach, they cannot make it from nothing. They split it off, and they are left holding the other half of the deal, a bicarbonate ion, which is the alkaline sort of thing, the baking soda sort of thing. And they do not just throw it away. They dump it out the back door into your blood. So every time your stomach cranks up to make acid for a meal, the very same act pushes a little wave of alkali into your bloodstream, and for a while after you eat, your blood itself, your whole body, tips ever so slightly toward the alkaline side. They gave it a lovely name. They call it the alkaline tide, a tide. Something that rises through your body after dinner and then falls again. And you never felt it, and you never knew. And it is happening in you tonight. Now I ask you, does that sound like a beaker of acid getting watered down by a glass? It sounds like a chemical engine with an exhaust pipe running out into the sea. Because that is what it is. Once you see it that way, the whole question just dissolves, the way the water itself dissolves out of the stomach in under an hour, gone before it could matter. Drink water with your meal. Do not drink water with your meal. It is, for your digestion, very nearly nothing either way, and I would rather you drank if you were thirsty, because thirst is a real signal from a real control system and the myth is not. But I did not tell you all this to settle an argument at a dinner table, although you may certainly use it there. I told you because of the habit of mind it teaches, and that habit is worth more than the fact. The person who invented that myth saw a stomach and thought, jar, static thing. Fill it, dilute it, it stays diluted. And that is the mistake people make about living things again and again and again. They picture a still pond when they are looking at a fountain. They see a number on a gauge holding steady and they assume nothing is happening, when in truth the steadiness is the most expensive, most active, most furiously worked for thing in the whole picture. Your body temperature holds near 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, not because heat is trapped in you like tea in a thermos, but because 1,000 little furnaces and radiators are adjusting themselves minute by minute to keep it there. Your blood holds its own pH in a band so narrow it would frighten you, by machinery every bit as busy as the stomach's. Steadiness in a living thing is never laziness. Steadiness is work you cannot see. That is the real lesson hiding inside the silly warning about water. When you find something in nature that stays the same while you poke at it, do not conclude that it is dead and simple and safe to reason about like a jar. Get suspicious. Ask what is holding it there. Ask what would happen if the holding stopped. Because almost always, the calm surface you are looking at is the top of a machine running flat out underneath, correcting, pumping, answering every push with a push of its own, so smoothly and so fast that the only evidence it exists at all is that nothing appears to change. Your stomach is not a cup you can spoil. It is a small, tireless engine, tasting its own output, adjusting its own fire, dumping its exhaust into the tide of your blood, and holding a line of fierce acidity against everything you throw at it, water and steak and worry alike, all day, without ever once asking you for thanks or even for your attention. So drink the water. The engine was never in any danger, and the next time something in you seems to be simply, quietly holding still, remember what that stillness usually costs.